Good morning, it's Dr. Rutledge, and this is another one of our podcasts. And this morning I'm going to be talking about reflux. And reflux is a big deal. When I first started the mini gastric bypass 23 years ago, the critics said, oh, everyone will have reflux all the time, and the operation won't work. And now we find that there was a hint of truth in that, but they were mostly wrong. It turns out that if you do the surgery right, there is a very low incidence of reflux. Maybe less than 1 out of 100 people have reflux. On the other hand, some surgeons have reported that 10 out of their 100 have so severe reflux, they have to have surgery. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And the summary of things is that the most important thing for having a good outcome, whether you have a mini gastric bypass or another operation, is to have a good surgeon. And we think that there is a good way to do the mini gastric bypass and a not so good way. I'm biased. I think my way is good. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So what we're saying here is that the difference in the outcome may be related to how the surgery is done. And if you think about it, that's just kind of common sense. But the idea that reflux can happen is something we want to talk about. What exactly is reflux? What is refluxing? What's coming back? What's going forward? And how you get it, how you can avoid it. And the first thing off is I now work with Dr. Ilan in Tijuana and San Diego. And I'm happy to say I've operated with him on many cases. And in my opinion, he does the MGB right. And we'll talk more about that in future videos and podcasts. But today we're just going to go over the basics, some of the background, and talk a little bit about reflux. And so what's reflux? Well, we're going to begin by saying, how do you eat? And I think this is an interesting question because a lot of people don't think about it. In other words, you take a bite of pizza or ice cream or a drink of Coca-Cola or other junk foods or healthy foods, it makes no difference. You kind of take a bite, chew a few times, and forget it. And you don't have to think about it ever again. That food is gone from your intellect, your conscious mind. You forget about it. And basically, God and your body takes care of everything else. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about digestion, how you move through, what you're going to keep, what you're going to get rid of. None of that's in your conscious mind because of the miracle of digestion. And it really is a miracle. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So let's imagine what happens. Let's say you take a bite of pizza. You take a bite, you chew it a few times, and chewing more is better. We'll talk about that on another podcast. And then after you chew it for a while, you swallow it. Now, what happens? Well, basically, if you think about your gut from the top to the bottom, from the mouth to the outlet down there below, the food has to get there somehow, and it has to go somewhere, and stuff has to happen. So let's understand what that is. Basically, you could kind of simplify the whole digestive tract into one long tube. I like to think of it as kind of a long garden hose. And if I just told you I have a little bite of pizza and I want you to put it in one end and have it come out the other, I think you could imagine that's a little bit complicated. I mean, how would you get something from one part of a garden hose and something about 20 feet further away? In other words, you would have to move it, and moving it in humans and animals is a system that includes nerves and muscles in a highly coordinated fashion. It's called peristalsis. So if you've ever imagined that gurgling that you hear sometimes, that's the noise of the peristalsis actually working. And so what we're going to talk about for just a few minutes is how in the heck that actually works. And so I'm going to use some audio-visual aids. What we're going to say is we have to get all the food from here down here, okay? And so now imagine you've just swallowed it into the tube. Well, what we want to do is say move it from here down there so the muscles and the nerves realize we've got a delivery here at the front door, and so it squeezes. And when it squeezes, then some of this moves, and down here we have to open. Okay, so this opens, this holds tight. Once this is squeezed tight and this has moved, then you squeeze again. Okay? Got it so far? All right, we working together here? I know, it's not that hard, just making a joke. All right, so now you've got these two squeezed, but then you have to release because this is going to be ready again. And this then is the extra muscle down here. He squeezes, and now it moves a little bit. This guy, of course, was open and all the way down. So you're saying, well, so what? That's, who cares? That's nothing. It's simple. I don't even know why this guy's talking about it. I wonder if I can find a more interesting podcast. Well, I apologize. But you take that for granted. It seems really simple. It's actually a coordinated neuromuscular system. And now imagine that that doesn't work. Okay? You die. In other words, that's life and death. You think nothing of it. You've never thought about it before, possibly. And what I'm telling you now is you live or die based on how that works. If it doesn't work, you're out. Okay, so all right, now you have a little bit more respect. Let me go a little bit further. Let's imagine it goes backwards. That's reflux. Now, depending on where it starts to go backwards and other things, but not just food can come back. Remember that something else has to happen. You can't just move food through and say, hey, we're done. We have to also digest and absorb the food. Oh, not just coordinated neuromuscular. We have to essentially dip the food in a vat of acid, enzymes, and bile. We have to destroy the food so that we can absorb it and then remake it into our body, our brain, our eyes, our movement, our muscles, our bones. Okay, so if you ate pizza, now what happens? Well, first of all, we got to get it out of the back of your throat. So we swallow. Okay, got that. Next, what do we have to do? Well, we have to begin the process of moving it into the section where we're going to digest our food. Okay, and that section is got to undergo some pretty powerful chemical reactions. We've got to pour in acid, for example. We have to pour in enzymes that will destroy, completely take apart the food from pizza down to individual molecules. Okay, in other words, not just squish it, but we have to turn it into dust, and not just dust, but into individual atoms and molecules, which you have probably heard of: carbohydrate, fats, and proteins, along with a variety of hundreds of other chemicals, vitamins, minerals, and things like that. So we have to take your pizza and we have to move it somewhere where we can blast it. We want, for example, to dip it in acid. We want to dip it in proteins and enzymes that will destroy it and take it apart. And also, we have enzymes, bile and acid, that's so powerful, it can take us apart. Not to be gross about it, but if we put one of us inside there, it would take us apart. We would be dissolved into nothing. So we have a vat of acid, enzymes, chemicals, bile sitting inside of us, ready for the pizza. So again, remember milk, 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 down through the esophagus. And why the esophagus? Because the esophagus is just to be a transport. It goes through the high-rise section of the heart and lungs. In other words, your body has a hierarchy of organ systems. Many people would say the brain is at the top. I would say not everybody's brain is at the top. No political comments, but we're happy he's gone now. So anyways, yeah, brain is at the top. Then heart and lungs, they're big. They're really important, life and death. And then we get down to the digestive tract, your tummy. So the esophagus doesn't do anything. It's just a passive tube. But it does do something. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to criticize you, Mr. Esophagus. It moves the food from here down to the vat of acid and enzymes. And moving food is a big deal, because if it doesn't work, you can get, wait for it, reflux. That's what we're talking about today. So your esophagus, we kind of don't think about it as being that important, but it's really important if it doesn't work. And so what we want to remember is our esophagus is working for us routinely every day, and you get peristalsis. You get squeeze, move. That moves the food down the esophagus. And it's going to be that same process, peristalsis, all the way through the gut. And you need to understand that if you want to make your gut work well. In other words, I use an analogy. I used to say a woman goes to buy a car, but now I've been educated. So now I say a man goes to buy a car and he buys a very expensive, let's say a Mercedes. And he takes it home and it crashes all the time. So he takes it back the next couple of days. He says, listen, I spent lots of money on this Mercedes. It's not working. And the salesperson is shocked. I'm terribly sorry because most of our customers are quite happy with the Mercedes. But this guy is really upset. He's annoying, overbearing. And he says, look, I'm very upset. So the salesman says, no problem. So they take it out for a test drive. And then immediately the salesman notices that the driver is driving the car backwards. And he suggests you're going to have a lot better experience with this car if you drive it forwards. Okay. Now, it's the same thing with you and your gut and your mini gastric bypass and your sleeve. If you drive the car backwards, it's going to hurt you. You're going to have trouble. You're going to have reflux. Our discussion today is to teach you how to drive the car forwards. That's all we're going to do today. Your gut has a certain design philosophy. A car drives forwards most of the time. Your gut wants to work for you unless you or the surgeon mess it up. Okay, so we're going to talk today. As I said, choose a good surgeon first. I work with Dr. Ilan in Tijuana and San Diego, so we think he's a good surgeon. And also, you need to drive the car forwards if you want the best results, whether you have no surgery, sleeve surgery, lap band surgery, Roux-en-Y or MGB, drive the car forwards. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And that driving the car forwards is when peristalsis works normally. And remember, peristalsis is just this coordinated movement of food, acid, enzymes, and bile from top to bottom. Okay, so now I hope you're interested. You're wondering, how do I make sure I'm driving the car forward? And if you're very interested, maybe you've had troubles with acid or bile reflux, you might say, hey, maybe I could get something out of this podcast as opposed to the last one, which was boring. No, they're all excellent. Okay, so now we've got a little bit of base and we've got a ways to go to explain all this. So the normal person, your average person listening to this, and myself included, when we eat, we don't have to think about it, that this peristaltic movement is just magic. It works perfectly and we never have to think about it. But I want to tell you a story. There is a drug that's often given for when people get reflux. There's a class of drugs, and they're abbreviated as saying PPIs. They're abbreviated terminology of the group of anti-reflux drugs are PPIs. That's proton pump inhibitors. Okay, so there is a class of drugs given for when our gut doesn't work right. This class of drugs is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Whether you've had an MGB or anything, people around the world in the past several years have had more and more and more problems with their peristalsis. They are burping up acid, having acid go into their lungs, having surgery all over the earth in a huge number and rapidly increasing every year. There are studies from France and the United States where 15, 20, even 30% of the population is buying PPIs. They're getting prescriptions for PPIs. What's up with that? The whole earth, there's an epidemic of reflux. And the companies that sell these drugs making billions and billions of dollars. You can look all this up on Google, but PPIs are a multi-billion-dollar industry. Selling people drugs to fix their peristalsis is one of the biggest drug industry profit centers on earth. I mean, not just US, earth, everyone, all of us. And the people who are not taking them often only because they can't afford it. So what's the deal with that? What's the deal with that? Why is the whole earth suddenly getting more and more reflux? Well, if you've heard me talk in the past, you can guess where I'm going, which is people are eating a bad diet. They're eating junk food, and we're going to talk about why that is and what happens. So if you look around the world and look at people who have reflux and what they eat, and people who don't have reflux and what they eat, there's a difference. The more junk food you eat, the more meat, dairy, and eggs you eat, the more, forgive my language, crap you eat, the more likely you are to have reflux and the more severe it gets. And you might say, why? And so my job is now to explain why. So we'll go back to my silly, remember this? This is peristalsis. Well, imagine now that you're in charge of this train of peristalsis. In other words, you're the local conductor, the engineer, the person driving the train, okay? And you notice sometimes you're having trouble moving the food downstream. You start looking around and you start noticing junk food, candy, sweets, greasy foods, junk foods, hamburgers, things like that seem to result in more trouble, okay? And then you also notice that other foods that tend to be high in fiber, so like steel cut oats, an apple, other high fiber foods, they seem to work better. Okay, and so I want to give you, imagine there's a tube again, and you want to squeeze stuff down the tube. Imagine toothpaste. If you're squeezing toothpaste, you know you could squeeze here and then squeeze there and release, and not much is going to sneak back because the toothpaste is, you know, thick. On the other hand, if this was filled with water, you know you'd have to keep this really tight, squeeze this one really tight, because if you open this one up and open this one up, some of that water might go refluxing backwards. Oh, in other words, what we have is this muscular pump, but it's not perfect. It's just squeezing. And if you were to squeeze a tube here or there filled with water, it sloshes back and forth. If you squeeze something a little bit thicker, then it has the opportunity to be imperfect and just move along. And this is not a perfect system. You know, it's not a machine, it's just you inside. And the squeezing is irregular, imperfect. And we know certain foods work better for peristalsis. And there's something else. If you practice something, if you lift weights, you'll get stronger and more coordinated. Your body will actually create a greater number of neurologic nerve connections to the muscle. So if you eat healthy food with high fiber, this peristaltic system will actually get better as well, because it's like lifting weights. They've done videos where they have people drink X-ray dye and they take a picture of this. And if you put junk food in there, then what happens is it's not as easily coordinated. It can't get the feedback and performance that it wants. In fact, this is all muscular. This is actually like lifting weights, and the muscle on the lining of the gut is important. You want good, strong, coordinated muscular pumping so food keeps going this way instead of going backwards. And so you want strong hold, release, coordinated. If you get backwards, you squeeze backwards, then it goes this way, then you're not happy. And what they've done is if you give somebody X-ray dye, you can watch this and with high fiber foods coordinated, and you can look at the muscular power being used. You can actually build up your gut if you eat high fiber foods. If, on the other hand, you eat junky foods or foods that don't have a lot of fiber, that get digested more quickly, you don't get this. And so ultimately you get less of the signaling that's coordinated and allowing your gut to work better. So eating healthy food is very healthy for building the coordinated peristalsis. Peristalsis is good, reflux bad. Now, when we haven't mentioned it, but why do you think reflux is bad? Well, remember, we have a vat of acid, but not just acid. I mean, acid alone, bad, but we have bile and we have enzymes, not just acid and bile alone, but enzymes, and these will destroy human, animal, tissue, and plants. I mean, destroy it, okay? You don't want that coming back up. Yes, no. This is reflux, and it can be called bile reflux, acid reflux, whatever. It's now growing all around the world because people are eating junk food. So the solution, first of all, is to realize that, and then realize something else. When you're going down, this is like a highway. And a highway can get clogged up if you put too many cars in it, right? In fact, any kind of transit system, water, toothpaste, or whatever, if you put too much in, you're going to get a backup. And again, we don't like backup. If we're doing this, we want these guys to be doing their work, keep moving, and we want these guys to do their work. If this guy can't do his work, then that's more trouble. So what else are we doing nowadays that you could imagine that would cause trouble? Yeah, eat a lot. Instead, for example, let's suppose you want to have some food during the day. Let's suppose you eat 3 or 4 pounds of food per day. Okay. What if you ate it all at dinner? In other words, a lot of my patients say, oh, I'm really clever. I skip breakfast. You know, I said, well, that's not that clever. She said, well, I read about it. I said, well, yeah, but it turns out that if you put a whole bunch of food in to this system, it's more likely to reflux. In other words, if you try and put 2 quarts in a 1 quart bottle, some of it's coming out. So a lot of people skip breakfast, have a junky lunch, and then have a big dinner, and then they kind of lean back and watch TV or go to bed, even worse. Well, then you tip the bottle over. All that's reflux coming back, all right? So don't do that. And also don't eat junk. And so for particular advice for my reflux patients, if they call me sleeve, lap band, Roux-en-Y, or MGB, here's what I recommend. If you're having terrible reflux and your doctors put you on this, or they're threatening you with surgery, you're going to have to do this or that, here's what I would do for a couple of weeks. First of all, I'd eliminate junk food just for a couple of weeks, see if you can stand it. And I would eat basically fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, stuff like that. And get rid of all kinds of sweets, candy, ice cream, juices, meat, dairy, and eggs. Just get rid of them for 4 weeks, and usually that gets better. But on top of that, we recommend that you eat 6 little meals a day. Now, this is not perfect forever, but it works really well for getting rid of reflux. So we don't want any meal to put a whole bunch in, because then you have backup. Instead, take a meal, and we recommend something like this time frame. Set your cell phone so that it goes off so that you can have a small meal at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 12 noon, 3 p.m., 6 p.m., and 8 p.m. And then don't eat after 8. Okay, and at each one of those meals, we'd like you to have something healthy. So what could you eat that's healthy? Well, if you know my recommendations, you'll know that I'm going to start off in the morning with steel cut oats. And steel cut oats are good because they have fiber, And there's a lot to talk about how fiber in cereals have already been processed, and that's not what we want. We want the relatively unprocessed food. And so what we would recommend, if you're having trouble with reflux, first of all, don't hesitate to call me because I have a more detailed presentation when I talk to individual patients. But number one would be to eat a little bit of oatmeal for breakfast, maybe half a cup. Get steel cut oats, not the others, not instant oatmeal, not old-fashioned oatmeal, not rolled oats, but steel cut. And the reason is it has more of this healthy fiber. Remember? Okay. Now, why is that different? Well, I'll stop here and say this good with fiber, a piece of bread, white bread, no, not so much. So for example, if you've ever seen a picture of whole plant oats or wheat, it looks a lot different than a donut. One is the whole plant and the other is a processed plant food. Donuts, reflux, oats, and under processed or less processed foods, good. So oatmeal is a good way to start the day, and not just any oatmeal, not instant oatmeal, not with a bunch of milk and sugar. But if you're really having trouble, my recommendation is just have plain oats. And so then people get grumpy and I say, all right, if you'd like something to add a little bit of taste to it, how about some blueberries? And that's a good way to start. And again, just half a cup, because remember, you're going to be eating again in just 2 hours. And then what we recommend is during the first month where you're trying to get over all this and get off your drugs and get everything healthy again, go ahead and have those 6 meals a day. And then we recommend that in the daytime, you have these types of foods. You can have oatmeal repeatedly if you want during the day. I know you don't want to, but okay. But if you're having bad reflux, anyways, then of course we recommend fruit. So you can always have a piece of fruit anytime. You can have fresh cut vegetables. You can have cooked vegetables. You can make some vegetable soup, and I talk more about that. You can go ahead and have a handful of nuts. You can have some dried fruits, not the candied kind, or you could have some beans, and we recommend beans, and there's a lot to talk about that. And then one of those little half servings 6 times a day, and usually your reflux will start to get better. And there's more detail on that, but that's just a quick summary. So want to get healthy, want to avoid reflux, drive the car forward. This has just been a brief discussion. There's a lot more to it, and I'd be happy to consult with you online. Feel free to call me anytime. I'm on Facebook, and myself and Dr. Ilan would be happy to see you in San Diego or in Tijuana. Thanks very much, and please stay tuned. We have more coming in the future.